Hello and welcome to this video on how to answer the storytelling prompt on the Cambridge B2 exam for schools. This is a step-by-step guide through the process. In this video, we're going to look at the writing part 2 on the Cambridge B2 first exam for schools. Students have the option of writing a story. This is a fun prompt to choose and almost always gives you a great opportunity to show off your mastery of the past perfect. The Cambridge B2 first exam for schools is specially designed for students between the ages of 13 and 17. It is widely accepted as proof of English for many international exchange programs and secondary school and university admissions. Now, here is an example of a storytelling prompt on the B2 first exam for schools. First, we are told that we need to write our answer in 140 to 190 words in an appropriate style. The word limits are guidelines. It's okay to be a few words over or a few words under. Nevertheless, we should do our best to stay within the limits. It's also important to know that the sentence provided in the prompt is not included in the word count. And what is meant by an appropriate style? For a story, your style can be casual and should not be academic. It can contain contractions, exclamations, and idioms. You must use narrative tenses, such as the past simple, the past continuous, and the past perfect, and linking words, and B2 level adjectives and phrases. Now here is the prompt itself. Stories wanted. We are looking for stories for our new English language magazine for young people. Your story must begin with this sentence. Leo walked into the room and immediately sensed that something was wrong. Your story must include a broken object and a suspicious note. What we have to keep in mind is that we must begin with the sentence provided. We cannot change any words in this opening sentence, and the two elements provided must also appear in the story. Here are examples of more story prompts you might find on the B2 First for Schools. As soon as I looked at the message, I knew something was wrong. Your story must include a misunderstanding and a phone call. Tom couldn't believe his luck when he found the envelope. Your story must include a library and a secret code. Alex had no idea why everyone was staring at him. Your story must include a costume and a photograph. When Sophia heard the news, she immediately ran outside. Your story must include a missing pet and an unexpected helper. Do you notice anything about these first sentences provided by the Cambridge English B2 exam for schools? They all start somewhere in the middle of the action. This means you will have to let the reader know what happened before the first sentence, so before the opening scene. In other words, you'll always have a great opportunity to show off your past perfect skills. Let's get started. Let's try our hand at this story about Leo. At this point, you might be thinking, "Ah! Where do I start? My mind has gone blank." No worries. Just sit back and relax. I'm going to show you how to write a great story in a short period of time. On the exam, you will have about 40 minutes to write the story. That means you have time to do some brainstorming and make a plan. If you spend more time generating ideas and planning, you'll need less time to actually write the story. How much time should we spend brainstorming and planning? I recommend 5 to 10 minutes brainstorming and planning, 25 minutes writing the story, and 5 to 10 minutes revising the story. As you practice writing stories, you can adjust the time you spend on each part. You might find you are quicker in some parts of the process and slower in others. Great, let's start brainstorming. But how do we do that? We start by generating ideas for the essential elements of a story. But to do this, of course, we need to know, what are the essential elements of a story? First of all, we have to generate ideas about our characters. We need a protagonist, that's a hero, and an antagonist, that's the villain. We need a setting, that's where and when the story takes place. We also need a problem, something that the protagonist needs to solve, and the antagonist usually causes the problem or tries to prevent the protagonist from solving it. And on the Cambridge English B2 first exam for schools, there are always 2 elements that you must include in your story. Great! Let's brainstorm ideas for the essential elements of our story. Remember, our first sentence is, Leo walked into the room and immediately sensed that something was wrong. When brainstorming, it's helpful to ask ourselves questions. For example, for our characters, we can ask, who is Leo? Is he our protagonist? And who is our antagonist? As for the setting, we can ask, what room did Leo walk into? Where is this room? And when does the story take place? For the problem, we can ask, what problem does Leo have to solve? We also need ideas about the 2 elements that we must include. And in this case, it's a broken object and a mysterious note. And the questions we can ask are, what is the broken object? And what does the note say? Who found it and where? And who wrote it? Now I want you to brainstorm along with me. Pause the video and give yourself maximum 5 minutes to answer these questions. Restart it when you're ready and I'll share my ideas. Decide quickly and then stick with it. You don't have time to change your mind. And welcome back. I'll share my ideas with you now. Let's start with our questions about our characters. Who is Leo? Is he our protagonist? I decided that yes, he's our protagonist and he's a music school student. And who is our antagonist? The music teacher. And as for the setting, I decided that Leo walked into the music room, which is in the music school. And when does the story take place? I decided it's a school day and maybe it starts in the morning. We'll see. The next question is, what problem does Leo have to solve? This is the heart of our story, and that's why I decided first to figure out what two elements to include. Since the setting is a music school, I decided that the broken object is a broken violin. As for the mysterious note, I think it should be connected to the broken violin. So my idea is that it should say, if you fix this, it's yours. And what about these last two questions? Who found it and where, and who wrote it? I decided that Leo found it alongside the violin and that we don't know who wrote it. And now back to the problem. What problem does Leo have to solve? Well, it needs to be connected to the setting in a music school, to the broken violin, and to the mysterious note. It's important to keep your problem simple. You have only 140 to 190 words to tell the story. So here is the simple problem that I came up with. Leo found a broken violin and a note. The music teacher stole the violin and Leo had to get it back. All right, so we've done a really great job brainstorming. We have some great ideas. Now let's take another 5 minutes to make a plan. In other words, to organize our story. To organize our story means we have to devise a good plot. And devise means think up or come up with or dream up. And the plot is the series or the sequence of events that make up the story. Most stories have the same general plot structure. Plot structure means the arrangement of the events in the story, and it can be divided up into stages. Here in this diagram, we can see the stages of a good plot structure. So first we have what's called the exposition, then the inciting incident, the rising action, the crisis, the climax, the denouement, and the end. And what is the exposition? The exposition is the opening scene. This is where we introduce the protagonist and the setting, and there is no need to introduce the antagonist yet. And in our story about Leo, the exposition will contain Leo, the music school, and a school day. The next stage is the inciting incident. This is just a fancy term for the event that starts the action, that puts the story in motion. In our story about Leo, the inciting incident is when Leo finds a broken violin and a note. And when and where does he find it? On a school day, probably in the morning, in his locker, in the music room. The next stage is rising action. This is a series of events that leads us from the inciting action to the crisis, that is, the problem. In our story, the inciting incident is Leo's discovery of the broken violin, and the crisis, that is the problem, is the disappearance or the stealing of the violin. But what is the series of events that happened between the inciting incident and the crisis? We need to do a little more brainstorming. Pause the video and come up with your own ideas for a series of events. Okay, Here are some of my ideas for a series of events that takes us from the inciting incident to the crisis. So our inciting action, as we know, is Leo finds the violin and also the note. Next, he reads the note. Now, what about our next action? Stories are full of emotion, so maybe we can add some emotion here. How about Leo is excited? And why is he excited? Because the violin is beautiful. Now we know that we need to use some B2 level vocabulary, that is upper intermediate vocabulary. So beautiful seems a little simple. Why don't we replace it with something a little more sophisticated? How about the violin is exquisitely crafted? All right, and how about the next action? Well, it is a school day, so I think that Leo goes to class. And then Leo comes back from class, and guess what? That's when he senses something is wrong. Now we see we are at the opening time of our story. This is our first sentence, right? Leo walked into the room and immediately sensed that something was wrong. So the opening time of our story is right before the crisis. However, I think we need one more action before we get to the crisis, and that is that Leo looks around and realizes what is off. And now for a quick vocabulary side note. If something is off, this means the same thing as something is wrong. All right, and now we have arrived at the crisis. And I think we know already that the crisis is the problem the protagonist must solve. And at this point, we might meet the antagonist here, since the antagonist might cause the crisis. And in our story about Leo, the problem is the violin. It was stolen, and the antagonist is the music teacher because he stole the violin. So at this moment of crisis in our story, Leo realizes the violin is gone, but he doesn't yet know who took it. Next stage in our plot structure is the climax. This is when the protagonist succeeds or fails in solving the problem. The antagonist might make it hard for the protagonist to succeed. In our story about Leo, we now have to come up with the events that lead from the crisis to the climax. Time for some more brainstorming. Pause the video and come up with your own ideas. Restart it when you're ready. Okay, welcome back. And here are my ideas. First of all, we know that right before the crisis, Leo walked into the room and immediately sensed that something was wrong. And then we have the crisis itself, and that is when Leo realizes what is wrong, or we could say what is off, and that is that the violin is missing. All right, so now let's get from that crisis to the climax. First, he hears a noise in the hallway. Then he peers into the hallway. Then he sees the music teacher running with the violin. And then he chases the teacher and grabs the violin. And this final event here is our climax. And we see that Leo is successful. He has solved his problem. He got his violin back. Now we are at the second to the last stage, and this is known as the denouement. also known as falling action. And this is when the loose ends are tied up. In other words, our remaining questions are answered. What are some of the loose ends in Leo's story? For example, who gave him the violin? And why did the teacher steal the violin? We need to keep in mind we only have 140 to 190 words to tell our story, so we need to keep it simple. To keep it simple, I've decided Leo never finds out who gave him the violin, so we're not going to answer that question. All right, then how about this other question? Why did the teacher steal the violin? This is my idea. The violin was rare and expensive, and it was once played by a great violinist. So, of course, the music teacher wanted to steal it. The last stage is the end. So, we need a final sentence to wrap things up. Wrap things up means to end or conclude a task, an activity, or, in this case, a story. I'm not sure yet how I want to end the story. Maybe Leo is overjoyed to have his violin back. Maybe he's sad his teacher was dishonest. Maybe he wonders who gave him the violin. I'll decide when I've written the rest of the story. Now we're ready to write. On both the digital and the paper versions of the test, you will be able to brainstorm on a piece of paper provided, so make sure to bring a pen. On the digital version, you can also brainstorm and plan in the text box and then erase your notes as you incorporate them into your story. Now let's have a look at our plan. I have copied all our notes onto this page. Our notes are organized according to the stages of the plot structure, but this does not mean that this is the order in which we will tell the story, because, as we know, the event referred to in the opening sentence provided for us comes at the end of the rising action. And here is that opening sentence. Leo walked into the room and immediately sensed that something was wrong. So if this is where our story begins, then we can write a lot of the actions that happen here in the past perfect. And a lot of the actions here will probably be in the past simple or past continuous. Let's start writing. Here on the left-hand side, we see the first page of our notes. And here on the right side, we have our text box. This is where we're going to write our story. And here we're going to write our first sentence, the one that is provided for us. And remember, we are not going to make any changes in this sentence at all. Okay, so let's get writing. So Leo sensed that something was wrong, and we can just add this little transition question, but what? And now let's have a look at our notes. Our notes will be very useful guiding us through the writing of the story. And our notes say, looks around room, realizes what is off. So here is what I wrote. He looked around the room and then realized what felt off. The violin. It was missing. This is our opening scene. It begins at the end of the rising action. It ends with the introduction of the central problem in the story, the crisis, that is, the missing violin. And our protagonist, Leo, does not yet know the music teacher stole it. And now that we've had this exciting opening scene, it's time to jump back in time. It's time to write our exposition and let the reader know what happened that led us to this exciting moment of a missing violin. We know that in the exposition, we usually meet the protagonist and we find out the place and time at which the story takes place. In our story, the protagonist is Leo, and the place is the music school, and the time of day is the morning. And here's what I wrote. That morning, when Leo had gone to music school. And you'll notice, because we've jumped back in time, we have the past perfect here. And that's our exposition. Now, in the rest of the sentence, we can introduce the inciting incident. In our story, the inciting incident is Leo finds a broken violin. So here goes. That morning, when Leo had gone to the music school, he had found a broken violin accompanied by a mysterious note in his locker. And after the inciting incident, we now come to the rising action, which is a series of events. Events 1 through 3 happened before the opening time of the story, so I'm going to use the past perfect for all of them. When he'd read the note, he'd felt excited. "If you fix this, it's yours," the note had said. Such an exquisitely crafted violin could be his. Happily, Leo had gone to his morning class. And our word count at this point is 88 words. And as I mentioned earlier, on the digital exam, there is an on-screen word counter, so the word count will be easy to keep track of. Now we're back to the opening time of our story. What do we need here? A transition sentence. We mustn't repeat the first sentence, but we have to remind the reader what happened in the opening scene. And here's my idea for a transition sentence. I've actually written 2. Now back from class, Leo sat sadly in the music room. The violin wasn't his anymore. And as we can see here, because we have moved beyond the opening time of the story, we are using the past simple. These transition sentences also introduce the crisis. In other words, the problem Leo has to solve. And that is that the violin is gone. It was stolen by the music teacher, and Leo has to get it back. Now here is our second page of notes, and we're going to move the text box to the left side of the screen. And here we have another series of events that will take us from the crisis to the climax. Again, all of these events happened after the opening scene, so I'm going to use the past simple unless I need the past perfect on the sentence level. Okay, so let's start writing again. In our story, Leo has already realized that the violin is missing. This happened in our transition sentences. And so I'm going to continue with number 1 in our series of events, and that is that he hears a noise in the hallway. And here we go. I have written, just then he heard a noise in the hallway. Let's continue with event number 2. I've written, he peered into the hallway and saw the music teacher running with the violin. Here we are at the climax of the story. This is where Leo has to solve the problem. So let's write the climax. Leo chased after his teacher and grabbed the violin. It was his again. Leo was overjoyed to have his violin back. Great. That was full of action and suspense. Now we're ready to wrap things up. The word count is approximately 140. That's great. We still have enough space to finish the story and add some more details. Now we're ready for the denouement. This is also known as the falling action. In this stage, any remaining questions are answered, and secrets, if there are any, are revealed. In our story, I decided we never find out who gave Leo the violin, but we do find out why the music teacher stole it, because it was rare and expensive and was once played by a great violinist. So this information goes in our denouement. And here's our denouement. Leo later discovered the violin was a rare and expensive instrument played by the greatest violinist of the 20th century. Let's add, which explained why his music teacher had stolen it. Here we have the past perfect again, but not because it's part of a series that happened before the opening time. Instead, this is sentence level use of the past perfect to emphasize that first, the teacher had stolen it, and second, Leo discovered it was a special instrument. Now it's time for the ending. I'd like to add some information that is actually part of the denouement, and that's that Leo never found out who had given him the violin. And I'd like to end on a happy note, so I'd like to say that he is grateful nevertheless. And so here is our final sentence. Leo never found out who had given him the violin, but he'd be forever grateful for this generous gift. And our word count now is around 180. This means we have plenty of space to spruce up our story. And spruce up means to revise and improve, to make it better and more polished. We should spend about 5 to 10 minutes on revising our story. So let's make our revisions. To score well on the B2 exam, you need to use B2 level vocabulary and phrases, B2 level grammar, and lots of linking words and connecting phrases. Let's see if we can make some improvements. Let's start by leveling up the vocabulary in this story. Most of the words I've used are closer to B1. We don't have time to rewrite the story, so let's find a few words here and there that we can replace with more advanced synonyms. Stories are a great place to show off any idioms we know, too. Here we can see, highlighted in blue, are some of the words that I think we could easily level up. For example, we can replace look around with scanned. We can replace excited with over the moon. Over the moon is a great idiom, and whenever we can, we should try to use some idioms in our writing. Idioms make our writing more vivid and engaging. We can also replace happily with jubilantly and sadly with despondently. I'm going to make some space and add another idiom here. And here is my idiom. His dreams had been dashed. And on this second page of our story, running can be replaced with darting away. And chased after can be replaced by pursued. And I have a really great idiom for grabbed, and here it is. He wrenched the violin out of his hands. Next thing we could level up is grammar, but we have a lot of good past perfect sentences, so we should be okay grammar-wise. However, we do have a stylistic problem. Look at all the sentences on the second page beginning with Leo. That's too many. We need to fix that. Let's begin with this sentence. Leo was overjoyed to have his violin back. The emotion expressed in this sentence could be communicated in a different way so that we don't have to use the word Leo at the beginning. We could condense it into this phrase in triumph and add it to the end of the idiomatic expression, wrenched the violin out of his hands. And there it is. Leo pursued his teacher and wrenched the violin out of his hands in triumph. Since this phrase in triumph tells us that Leo was feeling great, we can now cross out this sentence. Leo was overjoyed to have his violin back. And we have gotten rid of one of our Leos. As for the next Leo, we can change the sentence structure. Instead of Leo later discovered, we can say, later it turned out that, and now we no longer have too many Leos. However, I've noticed another stylistic problem. At the top of page 2, I wrote hallway twice. We should avoid word repetition. I've also noticed my story is a few words over the limit. We can kill two birds with one stone. We can combine the two hallway sentences so that we reduce the word count and get rid of the word repetition at the same time. Let's cross out he heard and in the hallway. We'll change he heard to hearing and add some commas here and here and a lowercase h. So the sentence reads, just then, hearing a noise, he peered into the hallway and saw the music teacher darting away with the violin. On page 1, we also have word repetition. We have note 3 times. We have it here, here, and here. So let's get rid of this repetition too, while also reducing the word count. Let's cross out this and this. We'll add a which said here, and then we'll move this right after the which said. This part of the sentence now reads, he'd found a broken violin accompanied by a mysterious note which said, if you fix this, it's yours. Okay, so now let's move on. Now we need to do something with this. This is my idea. Let's make some space so we can add a linking phrase. And this is our new sentence. Upon reading it, he'd felt over the moon. Excellent. We've leveled up our vocabulary and improved our style. Our grammar structures are solidly B2. What's next? The final step in the revision process is to check for grammar mistakes, misspellings, and typos. You should keep a list of your typical mistakes and be sure to check carefully for them. Here's how the story would be evaluated on the Cambridge B2 exam for schools. For content, the story would score a 5 out of 5. The story addresses the prompt perfectly. It starts with the required sentence. It develops a clear, engaging narrative around the violin mystery, and it resolves the problem in a satisfying way. For communicative achievement, it would also score a 5 out of 5. It is written in an appropriate, semi-informal tone for the task, and it is imaginative and engaging, yet clear and easy to follow. The next criterion is organization. This is where our planning really pays off. For organization, we would get a 5 out of 5. Paragraphs are logically arranged. First, we have the opening scene in which the problem is introduced. Then we have the flashback to the morning, which explains how it started. Then we face the immediate problem, the missing violin. And finally, we have the chase and then the resolution. The story also makes good use of cohesive devices. For example, it contains clear time markers, such as that morning, now, just then, and later. On the final criterion, language, the story would also get a 5 out of 5. It contains wide and appropriate vocabulary and idioms, such as exquisitely crafted, jubilantly, and his dreams were dashed. It also contains good use of narrative tenses, especially the past perfect, and some advanced structures, such as accompanied by a mysterious note, and which explains why his teacher had stolen it. Here is our overall score. Content 5, communicative achievement 5, organization 5, and language 5. So it is overall a 5 out of 5, an excellent B2 story. Thank you for watching.